Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. Interesting things we're going to talk about today, and they are related to ethics in business and scenario, a true one, we're going to delve into. And what would you do in this situation? He is a adjunct professor of business ethics, senior researcher and director. He's done so much over the years with business ethics, teaching it, dissecting it, researching it. And he's back with us. Ronald Berenbeim is on the program. Welcome back, Ronald. How are you today?
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you back here. We've talked about some cases in the past couple of weeks that involve ethics, business ethics. Today, we're going to look at one. It's an interesting scenario, and it does make you think what you would do for a loved one, how far you would go for a loved one. So start us off on that. This is actually a true situation, correct?
Well, I don't know if it's true, but it was devised by a famous academic, Lawrence Kohlberg, professor at Harvard. Interesting side issue on this is that Kohlberg actually committed suicide sometime after he devised this. I don't know whether this hypothetical had anything to do with it.
Wow.
But it's called The Dilemma of Heinz. And Heinz's wife is dying. There is a medicine that will save her life. A druggist has that medicine. Heinz cannot afford it. Heinz can, however, afford to reimburse the pharmacist for what it cost him. He does offer to pay, on installments thereafter. Druggist says no. So the question then becomes, should Heinz steal the medicine, or should he just let his wife die? Those are his only two alternatives. And what we are drawing on here are the experience we have gained through our discussion of two previous cases. One was the 92nd Street Y case, and you may recall that when I opened that with a story about the Napoleon's foreign minister Talleyrand, who, when told by an aide that the Russian ambassador died, he said, "What were his motives?" In other words, Talleyrand believed that nobody did anything without a motive. They were always driven by motives, and those motives always related to their personal welfare. And then the alternative comes from, I think, someone more recent than Talleyrand, the newly declared Speaker of the House, who, when he was asked what he would do about a specific political controversy, I think it may have been the Ukraine, funding the Ukraine, he said, "Well, I'm always guided by the Bible in whatever I do." So the commands of the Bible would seem to be unequivocal, particularly the 10 Commandments, where it says, "Thou shalt not kill." But upon sober reflection, when you think about it, if the Bible were totally consistent with that, then Goliath would be the Boston Patriots' first-round draft choice now. So you have to think about, well, the Bible isn't consistent, motives are conflicting, and so we get to a theory propounded by the American philosopher John Rawls, who talked about reflexive equilibrium. And he said, well, everybody does things that are either in self-interest or out of obedience to a higher law. So we have to look for those areas of convergence for our solution. Where do these not entirely concentric circles overlap? So hence we get to the dilemma of Heinz, and how do you find the happy medium there. And in this, we have the Colebrook example of the man's wife uh, who is dying. And Colebrook wasn't interested in the decision itself. He was interested in how you got there.
So let's
And
let's dissect the parameters here. So this gentleman Hines needs medication for his dying wife. Can't afford it. He has enough to pay. I want to make sure I have this right. He has enough money to pay the pharmacist for what the pharmacist pays for the pharmaceutical, the medication. Is that correct?
that's correct.
But the pharmacist isn't selling it to him at that price. He has a set price. It's a markup to make profit. And here's the number. The man can't afford that number. So we have that correct, right? Wow. Wow. Yeah, it's almost in that situation hard to fathom. And again, this could be hypothetical that the pharmacist wouldn't say, "All right, I'm going to give it to you for what I paid for it." And and yeah, to me that's doing the right thing, but then I guess everybody could come with their story to the pharmacist in every situation saying, "I can't afford it. I
The
need it really
pharmacist
bad."
wouldn't necessarily know whether or not to believe him or what. But
Right.
so
Hmm.
Koberg says, I'm not so much interested in what you decide to do. I'm interested in how you decide to do it. And using John Rawls's theory of, reconciling these two and finding the areas of convergence between self-interested moral reasoning and instinctual self-interest
Hmm.
and obedience either to higher law or to the law itself. You try to find the median. And Holberg saw uh, basically 6 different levels of moral reasoning. And the first he described as pre-conventional, no internalization of morals. Reasons are external to the individual. So stage 1 is punishment and obedience. And punishment and obedience would be they'll catch me, they'll put me in jail, they'll cut my head off, whatever, I better not do it.
Now
Has nothing to,
you're referring to if the gentleman Hines were to steal the medication,
yes.
the consequence.
So
Okay.
so if he is at the level 1, pre-conventional, he just knows he's going to be punished and he just doesn't feel he can risk that. And stage 2, individual self-interest, it overrides the fear of punishment and he steals it. After all, he can't let his wife die.
Right.
And that's pre-conventional. There are no laws, there are no police, there's nothing about, but if he steals it, and if he gets caught, he will suffer an extreme penalty. So level 2 is conventional morality. That's intermediate. There's an internalization of morals. He seeks some kind of approval for stealing it. Maybe like our new Speaker of the House, he looks in the Bible. Maybe he asks his friends, other people in the village, and they say, "Oh my God, you mean you're going to let her die?" And
Mm.
so he seeks some kind of approval, but it's not a formal institutional approval. It's not an unequivocal uh, written or enunciated approval, but he tries to get some sort of approval. And stage 4 is law and order. It's against the law, period. It's against the law to steal it. And so he just can't do it. And then comes level 5, level 3, which was the area that Kohlberg was most interested in and into which his subjects fell. This, after all, being the 1960s in the United States when these experiments were conducted. And so stage 5 would be interpretation of the law. So you go to court or whatever, you seek an injunction, you seek whatever you do that requires, or you when the pharmaceutical is licensed, it's a requirement that it must be given to someone, or insurance must cover it if the person's going to die if they don't get it, or whatever. That's some sort of legal sanction based on experience and interpretation. As Justice Holmes said, the life of the law is not logic, but experience. Over time, the law has decided these are the exceptions it has to make. And then stage 6 are universal ethical principles. And that, to me, seems to be a pretty difficult test, because my idea of universal ethical principles might be different from yours. For example, I think an anthropologist questions some people in other societies, and somebody from Guinea said, well, if he weren't allowed to take that medicine, we would have failed as a society. And so that was the conventional morality. And that was the law as it was understood. Not so in Heinz's little village, supposedly in the middle of Switzerland or wherever it was, Germany. So so the question is, what are the reasons why you made the choice you did?
And now we're going to look at this. This is hypothetically placed in the 1960s, I think I heard you said.
Well, that's when Kohlberg devised it, and it's assumed
Okay.
it was a current.
So then we didn't have the technology we have today. There was no GoFundMe. There was no
crowdsourcing, nothing like that.
Exactly. So we'll factor that out in this situation.
Right.
Okay.
However, Heinz's friend said that Heinz asked the druggist, give me a little time, maybe my friends will lend me the money. And the druggist said no. So sort of that.
Okay.
Kind of.
For you, looking through the ethical lens, where do you sit on all this?
Well, my view is, I guess, that I think that the medicine was devised for purpose. The purpose was to make people well. And, the price was devised based on a certain margin that would permit everybody to come out ahead, permit everyone to benefit. Now, arriving at that happy medium is always going to be a matter of trial and error. You may have to give it away. You may confront widespread theft. You may confront extortionate pricing that has to be regulated. And over time, you develop a response, and before the New Deal, people died of diseases that Social Security and other things eventually enabled them to survive for a while longer. So this is just part of the process of trial and error, and it doesn't avoid the question of whether or not Heinz would steal it or the druggist should refuse to give it to him. But if enough druggists refuse, or if enough Heinzes steal it, then sooner or later it will be the job of government to work out a modus vivendi between these two conflicting parties.
Interesting dilemma to be in. Because really you only have, what are your two choices here? It's either we're down to steal it or your wife passes. I don't see any other options in this scenario, because it doesn't look like the pharmacist is doesn't seem like they really care. This is the way it is. I'm not selling it to you for less than
Right.
fair market value.
It's
Um,
not, it's not in the pharmacist's, the pharmacist does not feel that he has any writ to make exceptions. He is more or less conditioned not to agree to them. And he is also probably skeptical as to whether or not Heinz is telling the truth.
and I'm going to go with that there because short of that, to me, horrible person in the pharmacist. But I see, I have to look at it from both sides as we all do, that anybody could walk up tomorrow and say the same thing, and 3 days later, somebody says the same. Boy, you gave it to Heinz at wholesale. Why can't you give it to me? I've got a dying relative right here. So we have to look at that and understand that in the scenario. Um, so it begs the question. I have to ask, Ronald, what would you do?
If
And
I were
I hope your
Heinz,
wife is
I
not
would
nearby.
focus. What?
And I hope your wife is not nearby.
Not not that close right now. But well, I'm old enough to remember, and you probably are too, of when you were a child, of stories in your family of people who died from diseases for which a cure was available, but they couldn't go to the Mayo Clinic because they lived in New Mexico or whatever, and so on and so forth. So there is something in my background that says, well, the rich live longer sometimes because they can afford to. Even today, here in New York City, if you were a large donor to a particular hospital, you get moved into a private room, all sorts of attention that ordinary people don't get. So these kinds of inequalities exist even to this day
Hmm.
and in our lifetime. Still, if you've got a mother or a wife or a child and you can do something about it, even at risk to your own liberty, I think that is the choice I would make.
I'm with you there on that. It's the chance I would take and just see how whatever the penalty is going to be, however it's going to play out, because you're in a desperate situation and you do have an option. It's not like they're saying no medication available. I'm sorry. That's the way it is. There is an option.
It's not as though some people haven't resorted to it at some time or another. They've been caught and they've been the reason why the law has been changed. So perhaps by doing so, you can contribute to some kind of improvement in the situation ultimately.
Well, I shared before we got on here, in terms of pharmaceuticals and bureaucracy. And I don't know, I think there's even ethics involved in that too, where I tried to get a medication denied by the insurance company. It was a couple $100. It was needed. And I said, I'm just going to pay out of pocket then. I can't wait. And they wouldn't sell it to me. It has to go through the insurance company. Is there an ethical look at that? Or is that, a rule is a rule? I am paying. Whatever the cost is, and they wouldn't sell it to me. It has to go through an insurance company.
Well, I think there is probably a rationale for that, but I think it's probably something neither one of us would accept. And I think their argument would be,
Hmm.
well, we need to develop information on what the correct price point is for this medicine. And we can't do that if we allow enough exceptions to be made. And that also contributes to certain inequalities in the system that we can't allow to happen. Now, it's hard to accept that reasoning when you happen to be at the uh, receiving end of that kind of excuse. but I do think that that may be what they were thinking. I think it's ridiculous that they would accept that, because this was supposed to be devised to help people uh, get
Yeah.
over these diseases.
Yeah. The medication's available. The funds were there. And they wouldn't sell it. I'm curious. We are, talking about medication, insurance companies and such. What's your overview ethically about our healthcare system today in this country? Any initial thoughts on that from an ethical view of things?
Well, number one, I would have to condition my answer by saying I'm not sure I know enough, but that has never before stopped me from having an opinion, nor will it now.
Sure.
And I think that medicine should be available. Those costs should be passed on to those people who can afford it, and has been, and there always are some, and that will lead us to a point, which it has historically in the past, where we decide that that is something that where the government needs to intervene and use taxes and public money to make up the discrepancy.
I am disheartened by the way the system, many states have a marketplace. When you need insurance, and let's say you don't qualify for any subsidy, you're going to pay for your insurance. It's not covered by your employer. You're going to you want to buy insurance for your family. It's going to be a lot of money, but you have to go through the marketplace. They don't allow you to just call up an insurance company. The state of New York has this. I think it's about 20 states that have a quote unquote marketplace where it's almost as if the state has taken over the healthcare and not allowing you to shop around and get, the best rate. It's just, all right, well, here's your three choices and that's all we got for you. I don't know if you were aware of that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that that is a case of the misuse, which we have seen since, I would guess, about the middle 70s, maybe the early 80s, of the market as being the solution to all problems. So the government mandates that you have to go to a marketplace. That seems like a contradiction in terms. Why should you be forced into a marketplace? And why is this the market being the solution to the problem? And the most extreme example is the absurd argument that we can collect more taxes if we lower the tax rate. I mean, that's pretty ridiculous, isn't it? If we collect less in taxes, we will collect more in taxes. Kind of ridiculous, I
It
think.
is. We have a couple of minutes. Anything going on trending right now in terms of business ethics that might be on your radar?
Trending right now. Well, I think obviously you saw last night in the state of Ohio and in the state of, uh, in the Commonwealth, I should say, Virginia, that the idea that abortion, I will use the word, that the state can set the parameters for abortion beyond a certain very, very limited degree, far more limited than the state of Ohio or the Commonwealth of Virginia wanted to, that the public is going to rise up and say, no, we won't allow this. And it doesn't even become a party matter. You have majorities in both parties who take that view, and I think that's going to be an area of considerable contra. And the area, it's also an extreme case of ethics, because you're talking about fetal viability, and I think most people, myself included, who think that abortion should be generally available, would not include infanticide in that menu of options.
A lot of ethics that come into play with that. And yeah, very topical, day after election day. Interesting thoughts today. And the Heinz case, I was never familiar with that, but I'm actually going to ask my friends about that one, because it does make you wonder.
You will find lots of references to that. And Kohlberg had a student, very famous, who eventually became famous in her own right. Her name was Carol Gilligan, and she wrote a book called In a Different Voice, in which she said women would probably respond somewhat differently to that series of choices than men would, and she described how and why they would. She described them as being more empathetic. So you can follow up on both of those, Kohlberg and Gilligan.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. What a man would view that situation with the pharmacist or a woman. It gives you different perspective on the whole thing. Ronald, if somebody wants to connect with you, how do I find you? I know that your email address you make available.
Absolutely, that would be the way. Ronald.Berenbeim@gmail.com.
And Berenbeim spelled Berenbeim. Gotcha. Appreciate you
with crime. Fine.
Appreciate you being here today, and lots to think about. An interesting scenario that you brought up, and I appreciate it. Thank you again.
Nice talking to you.
You too. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcasts on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.